They say the deadliest poison is the one that comes from your own blood. When those you carried in your womb turn against you, there's no deeper pain in the world. And that's how I learned that not all a mother's love can save a child who chooses to be lost. Good afternoon, my dears. This is Grandma Betty, 72 years old, speaking to you from Charleston, South Carolina. But today you'll hear my story that took place mainly in my simple home in South Central Los Angeles, a neighborhood that has seen it all, from the days of dangerous projects to the gentrification we see today. The sound of car stereos blasting on Sundays was always the soundtrack of our community, along with the calls of street vendors and the daily hustle and bustle. Before I begin my story, I want to thank all of you who are following my channel. If you're enjoying my account, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe and comment below to let me know where you're watching from. It could be your neighborhood, your city, or even another country if there are Americans abroad. It brings this grandma so much joy to know that people from all over are listening to my stories. You can't imagine how happy it makes me. I was born in 1953 in a small town in rural Kentucky called Millerville, a place where life was hard but honest. My father, George, worked the fields, planting a bit of everything, corn, beans, potatoes, and my mother, Mary, took care of the house and sold homemade preserves to help with the income. We were poor, but we never went hungry. And more importantly, we were happy, united. Our house was simple, with a dirt floor that turned to mud during heavy rains, but it was filled with love. My father never raised his voice to my mother. Every night, no matter how tired he was, he would kiss her forehead and thank her for the food. On Sundays, when there was no work in the fields, he would take me fishing in the creek or picking fruit from the trees. My mother made sure to teach me everything about running a household. A woman needs to know how to take care of herself, daughter. Never depend on anyone but yourself, she would say. It was in that simple house that I learned the values I carry to this day. Respect, honesty, hard work, the importance of family. I grew up dreaming of building the same kind of home for my children, with the same love I received from my parents. Life was difficult but peaceful until I was 16, when a terrible drought destroyed my father's crops and forced us to try our luck in Los Angeles. We packed what little we had into 2 cardboard suitcases and boarded a crowded bus full of dreams and fears. It was a long, uncomfortable journey, but each mile taking us away from the dried-up land was a mile closer to hope. We arrived in Los Angeles in 1969 at the height of the city's expansion. People coming from all corners of America, buildings growing everywhere, noise, pollution, a world completely different from my quiet countryside. We settled in South Central, in a small house we shared with another family of migrants. My father got a job in a textile factory. My mother started working as a maid for a wealthy family in Beverly Hills. It was difficult at first. The big city swallows you up, you know. Everything is far away. Everything is expensive. Everyone is in a hurry. But we adapted, as human beings always do. I started attending a public school near our house and working part-time at a bakery. I wanted to help with expenses and, most importantly, save money to fulfill my mother's dream. Buying a sewing machine so she could work from home without having to take 3 buses to reach her employer's house. It was at that bakery where I met Richard. He was a delivery guy, taking bread to stores and groceries in the area. A handsome, strong young man with an easy smile and animated conversation. He was 22. I was 17. I fell in love with the way he looked at the world with optimism, even though he had grown up in the hardness of the projects. Richard never knew his father, was raised only by his mother who worked as a laundress. He only studied until 4th grade, but he had a natural intelligence, an ability to talk about any subject. Betty, one day I'm going to give you a good life, he promised me during one of our first dates. You'll never want for anything in our home. We dated for 2 years, always with the respect that my parents had taught me to demand. Richard would come on Sundays for lunch, help my father fix things around the house, bring simple flowers for my mother. He won over my family the same way he had won my heart, with sincerity, hard work, and that smile that lit up any room. We married in 1972, in a simple ceremony at the neighborhood church. I didn't have a designer wedding dress or a fancy reception, but I had something much more important: my parents' blessing and the certainty that I was beside a good man. Our first home was a small apartment in South Central, which was much smaller then than it is today. We had just one room, divided by a curtain that separated the living room from the bedroom. The bathroom was shared with 4 other families, but it was our little corner, our beginning. Richard continued as a delivery man. I worked as a sales clerk in a clothing store. We saved every penny to improve our lives, always certain that better days would come. Our first son, Mark, was born in 1973. It was such a joy, a healthy baby with his father's eyes and, according to my mother, his mother's stubbornness. Richard cried when he held the boy for the first time, promising that he would be a present, loving father, different from the father he himself never had. "Our son will get an education, Betty," he would say while rocking the baby. "He'll be a doctor, an engineer, whatever he wants. He won't have to wake up at 4 a.m. to deliver bread like his dad." Our second son, Alex, came in 1975. Then Wesley in 1977, Frank in 1979, and Charlie in 1981. 5 boys, one after another, filling the house with noise, with life, with hope. With each birth, we expanded our apartment, adding a room, improving what we could. Richard got a better job at a cigarette factory, working long hours but earning a bit more. I left my job outside the home to take care of the children, but I sewed at home, doing small repairs for the neighborhood. In 1984, when we thought our family was complete, I discovered I was pregnant again. At 31, after 5 boys, our little princess Christine finally arrived. The only girl, the youngest, Daddy's favorite, who no longer hid the gray hair at his temples, the result of hard work to support that large family. "Now our family is complete," Richard said in the maternity ward, holding little Christine in his huge worker's arms, with a delicacy that contrasted with his size. "God gave us 5 soldiers and a princess. What more could we ask for?" The years went by, and life followed its normal course, with the difficulties and joys of any poor family from the inner city. The boys grew strong, smart, always together like a true brotherhood. Richard worked more and more, accepting overtime, side jobs on weekends, anything to give his children what he didn't have: new school uniforms, complete supplies, sometimes even a toy on special dates. My parents, now elderly, continued to be our foundation of values. They would come for lunch every Sunday, bringing homemade sweets for their grandchildren and stories from Kentucky to fill the afternoons. It was from them that I learned to raise my children with love, but also with clear boundaries. "A child raised without rules becomes a problem, Betty," my father would always say. "Love isn't just hugs and kisses. It's also teaching right from wrong." We followed this advice to the letter. Our boys grew up knowing they had to help at home, study, respect their elders. We all went to church together on Sundays, participated in community events, maintained that sense of united family that had been the foundation of my own upbringing. But life in South Central Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s wasn't easy. Violence was growing. Drugs were beginning to dominate the street corners. Organized crime was infiltrating communities. As much as we tried to protect our children, the reality around them was harsh, tempting, dangerous. The first signs of trouble began when Mark, our firstborn, entered adolescence. Suddenly, the studious and obedient boy started skipping classes, coming home late, responding with aggression. We tried to talk, to understand what was happening, but he closed himself off more and more. "It's just a phase," Richard would say, trying to reassure me. "Every kid goes through this. It will get better soon." But it didn't get better. And worse, Alex, 2 years younger, began to follow in his brother's footsteps. Soon Wesley, too. It was like a domino effect, one dragging the other down a path we couldn't understand. In 1992, I received news that would change everything. My father died of a massive heart attack. He was working in the small garden he maintained in his backyard when he simply fell, with no time for help. My mother, destroyed by the loss of her companion of almost 50 years, couldn't withstand the sadness. Less than 3 months later, she passed too, leaving an immense void in my life. The death of my parents was a watershed moment. Beyond the pain of loss, it was as if I had also lost my moral compass, my safe harbor. Richard tried to console me, to be strong for both of us, but I could see in his face the same fear I felt. We were losing our children, and didn't know how to bring them back. Because the truth we didn't want to admit was that Mark, Alex, and Wesley were no longer the boys we raised. At 19, 17, and 15 respectively, they were involved with bad company, skipping school, coming home at impossible hours. And Frank and Charlie, even younger, were beginning to follow the same path, fascinated by the apparent freedom and respect that their older brothers earned on the streets. "Richard, we need to do something," I begged one night after Mark came home at 3 a.m. smelling of alcohol. "We're losing our boys," my husband sighed, rubbing his tired face after another 18-hour workday. "What do you want me to do, Betty? I'm breaking my back at that factory to give them what they need. I can't be home all the time to watch them." "It's not about watching. It's about saving. I'm afraid of what might happen to them following this path." Richard tried. He really tried. Serious talks, punishments, even a few spankings for the younger ones when the situation called for it. But it was too late. Our 3 oldest sons were already completely involved with local crime. We later discovered that Mark had become a drug runner at 16. Alex followed the same path shortly after. Wesley started by stealing small things and was soon committing armed robbery. Easy money started coming into the house. Suddenly, they showed up with brand-name sneakers, expensive clothes, sometimes even new appliances. "I won it in a game, Mom. It was on sale at the store, Dad. A friend gave it to me because he didn't want it anymore." Lies they told, and that, in the depths of desperation, we sometimes pretended to believe. Frank and Charlie, seeing their older brothers with money, respect on the streets, and apparent freedom, were being dragged into the same abyss. At 13 and 11, they were already skipping school to hang out on the corners with their brothers' friends, learning what they shouldn't. Only Christine, our youngest, seemed immune to that influence. Maybe because she was a girl, maybe because she saw the suffering etched in my eyes with each new disappointment with the boys, she remained studious, obedient, dreamy. She was the consolation on the hardest days, the proof that at least one little seed of our values had found fertile soil. In 1995, the tragedy I had feared so much began to unfold. Mark, at 22, was arrested for drug trafficking. He spent 2 years in prison, where instead of being rehabilitated, he only learned more about crime, made worse contacts, returned even harder. Alex was shot in a firefight with police in 1997. He survived, but was left with a bad limp, a constant reminder of wrong choices. Wesley disappeared for months in 1998. Then we learned he had fled to Nevada after a robbery gone wrong, where a security guard was killed. "It's punishment, Richard," I cried one night after receiving more bad news. "We did something wrong in raising them." "Where did we go wrong?" "It's not punishment, Betty. It's life. We gave love, we gave education, we set an example. But there comes a time when everyone chooses their own path. We can't carry this guilt, but I did carry it. How could I not? They were my children, my blood, my responsibility. Each wrong choice they made was like a knife to my mother's heart. And the worst was yet to come, even though I didn't know it yet. In 1999, when we thought nothing could get worse, fate showed us that there is always a deeper abyss. Frank and Charlie, now completely involved in crime, started using hard drugs. It wasn't just marijuana or alcohol anymore. It was cocaine, crack, things that transformed my boys into true strangers in our home. There were days when I would find Charlie, my youngest among the boys, now 18, trembling in a corner of the house, sweating profusely, begging for money to buy more of that poison that consumed him from within. Frank, at 20, had already lost almost all his front teeth, a result of continuous crack use. His eyes, once lively and bright, were now opaque, distant, lost in a world I couldn't reach. Richard, always the strong one in the house, began to wither gradually. Exhaustive work, constant worries, the pain of seeing his sons destroying themselves, all of this was undermining his health, his spirit. He began to have heart problems, high blood pressure, a cough that never went away, the result of decades breathing chemicals at the cigarette factory. And in the midst of all this chaos, Christine, our little princess, now 15, tried to maintain normalcy. She studied hard, dreamed of becoming a nurse, helped around the house, was the ray of sunshine in our increasingly darker days. Richard and I lived for her, to protect her, to ensure that at least one of our children would have a different future. "One day this will all pass, Mom," she would tell me while helping me make dinner, on the rare occasions when we could gather the family at the table. "The boys will understand that this path leads to nothing good." I have faith. Her faith kept me going. Her faith and the love of my Richard, who even sick, even tired, never abandoned our family, never gave up on our children, even when they seemed to have given up on themselves. But fate, my dears, sometimes has plans that destroy even the strongest faith. And it was on a night in September 2000, a night that seemed like so many others in our noisy neighborhood, that the nightmare I had never imagined possible became reality. A night that would forever change the meaning of family, of love, of trust. A night that would prove that sometimes the worst enemy is not the one lurking in the shadows of the street, but the one who sleeps under the same roof as you, who carries your blood, whom you once cradled in your arms, believing you were raising good men. Sometimes I wonder if a mother's love has limits. If there is a point where that unconditional love we feel from a baby's first cry can transform into fear, into disappointment, into an emptiness that nothing fills. It was by discovering this limit that I understood that not every child follows the path we dream of, no matter how much love we give. The year 2000 was when I saw my sons transform completely. Mark, my firstborn, was already 27 and had been out of prison for a while. Many people say prison rehabilitates, but it was different with me. My son went in as a thief and came out a real criminal, with contacts, with worse ideas, with a hatred in his eyes that I no longer recognized. I remember that before being arrested, as wrong as he was going, he would still smile at me, still call me mommy in the rare moments of affection. After prison, it was like having a stranger living in my house. Alex, my second son, at 25, had that leg that wouldn't heal properly after the gunshot. He walked with a limp, in constant pain, and used that as an excuse to sink deeper and deeper into drugs. "It's to ease the pain, Mom," he would say, when I found crack pipes hidden around the room. As if there could be greater pain than seeing a child destroying himself and not being able to do anything. Wesley, at 23, after that escape to Nevada, came back even more dangerous. He was the smartest of the five. He always was. In school, when he still went, teachers said he had the potential to be whatever he wanted. He ended up using that intelligence for the wrong side, becoming the brains of the group, the one who planned the robberies, who made contacts with larger gangs. Frank and Charlie, at 21 and 19, were the most lost in drugs. They couldn't go a day without using. They sold everything they got in the house, from a clock radio to kitchen pots. Once I caught Charlie trying to rip the copper wires from the wall to sell for scrap. It broke my heart. My Richard worked more and more, leaving before sunrise and returning when everyone was already asleep. I think it was his way of escaping that reality that we didn't know how to change. The factory drained all his energy, but I think he preferred the fatigue of the body to the fatigue of the soul, from seeing our sons getting lost one by one. Only Christine, our little one at 16, gave us any hope. Studious, respectful, dreamy. She said she wanted to be a nurse, to care for people, to make a difference. She reminded me so much of myself at her age, before life hardened my heart. Richard and I lived for her, to protect at least one of our children. It was around April 2000 that I noticed a change in my 5 sons. They started meeting more, whispering in corners, stopping talking when I entered the room. They were agitated, nervous, as if they were planning something big. I tried to ask, tried to get close, but they pushed me away. "It's nothing, Mom, stop meddling," Mark would say, always harsh. "Men's business, ma'am, doesn't need to know," Wesley reinforced. And so we continued for months, with that tension growing inside the house. They would leave together, return in the early morning, bring money that I knew didn't come from honest work. But what could I do? Report my own sons? Throw them out of the house? For a mother, these choices are like deciding which arm to cut off. In July that year, we discovered that all 5 had joined a gang that dominated part of our neighborhood. They were no longer small-time thieves or corner drug dealers. Now they were involved with big stuff, dangerous people, crimes I couldn't even imagine. A neighbor, Mr. Johnson, who had always been like an uncle to my boys, sought me out, concerned. "Mrs. Betty, your sons are mixed up with the Skull Crew. These people don't play around. Either you get them off this path, or you'll be crying over closed caskets." I cried all night after that warning. Richard tried to talk to them, one by one, then all together. It was useless. They laughed at our concern, said they were moving up in the world, that soon we would see. What kind of rise was this that only led deeper into the hole? August arrived with suffocating heat and increasingly worse news. There was a massacre in the neighboring district, 5 young men executed. Rumors spread that our boys had a hand in it. I never confirmed, never wanted to know. There are truths that a mother prefers not to know. The house that was once full of life, of laughter, of dreams, now seemed like a minefield. Christine and I walked on eggshells, afraid to say something wrong, to provoke explosions. Richard worked even more, even doing 18-hour shifts at the factory. He was running away, I knew it. I didn't blame him. Sometimes I wanted to be able to run away too. In September, things got even worse. The boys started bringing friends home, people with dangerous looks, with guns poorly hidden in their waistbands. They transformed the back room into a kind of headquarters where they spent hours locked up, leaving only to eat or for their nightly operation. "Mom, I'm earning respect in the hood," Alex told me one afternoon, showing a thick gold chain he had bought. "Soon I'll be able to give you a better house, get everyone out of here." How to explain to him that I never wanted a better house bought with blood? That I preferred our humble but honest home 1,000 times over to a palace built on the misfortune of others? The tension increased every day. The boys drank more and more, used drugs openly at home, no longer respected anything or anyone. Christine started sleeping in my room, afraid to be alone when that crowd arrived. Richard and I argued more and more, not knowing what to do, how to act, how to save what was left of our family. "We need to get out of here," he would say. "Take Christine and start over somewhere else." "And abandon our sons?" I would reply, still clinging to that foolish mother's hope. "They can still change, Richard. I have faith." Faith. That little 3-letter word that meant so much to me. It was what made me get up every morning, what gave me strength to continue, to believe that one day my sons would return to being the boys I raised. I went to church every Sunday, lit candles, made promises, prayed until I lost my voice. But it seemed that God had turned his back on our family. Or perhaps it was just the price we paid for the choices each one makes in life. I remember as if it were yesterday the night when everything changed forever. It was a Friday, September 22nd, 2000. Richard had left for the night shift at the factory, as he did 3 times a week. Christine was at a friend's house, doing schoolwork. Thank God, because she was spared what happened later. I was alone at home, washing the dinner dishes, when I heard the gate slam shut. From the heavy footsteps and loud laughter, I recognized my 5 sons returning. They were more drunk than usual, talking loudly, cursing. I could hear the sound of bottles clinking, strong smell of whiskey and marijuana invading the house. "Where's the old man?" shouted Mark, stumbling into the kitchen. His eyes were red, his pupil dilated. It wasn't just alcohol, I knew well. "He's working, as always," I replied, continuing to wash the dishes, avoiding looking directly at him. I learned it was better not to face them when they were like this. "And the princess? Mommy's favorite?" It was Alex who asked, laughing in a strange way that sent a chill down my spine. "At a friend's house, doing schoolwork. Should be back soon," I lied, wanting to protect Christine, keep her away from that heavy environment. All 5 entered the kitchen, surrounding me in a way they had never done before. I felt fear, a fear different from anything I had ever felt. It wasn't fear of what they would do to other people, it was fear of what they might do to me, to their own mother. "Don't you ever get tired, Mom?" asked Wesley, picking up a knife from the sink and playing with it between his fingers. "Don't you get tired of pretending we're a normal family? That Dad is an honest worker and you're a devoted housewife? All lies." "I don't know what you're talking about, son," I replied, trying to stay calm, feeling my heart racing. "We are a family." "Maybe not perfect, but family," interrupted Frank, laughing loudly. "What family? The one that Mr. Richard put in your head? The little house with the white fence, the studious children, all pretty? Wake up, Mom. Look where we live. Look what we've become." It's your fault, accused Charlie, the youngest of the five, but who at that moment seemed the most aggressive. Yours and that old man who only knows how to work and complain. You gave us nothing. Nothing. We had to find our own way. I was shocked by those words. How could the fault be ours? Richard, who worked 18 hours a day to support that house. Me, who bent over backwards to raise 6 children with dignity as much as possible. Who had given up my own dreams to be a full-time mother. You had everything we could give, I said, my voice trembling with indignation. A roof, food, school, love. If you chose this path, it was by your own choice, not because of us. That's when Mark, the oldest, slapped the table so hard it made the dishes jump. Shut up! I can't stand hearing this talk of love, of family, of choices anymore. Life is hard, Mom. There's no room for stupid dreams. At that moment, for the first time, I didn't recognize my son. He was no longer the baby I breastfed, the boy I taught to walk, the teenager who, despite the problems, still showed glimpses of the good heart he had. He was a stranger, with hatred in his eyes, with contempt in his voice, with a contained violence that seemed about to explode. What happened in the hours that followed is something I try every day to erase from my memory. Something so terrible, so painful, so unimaginable that sometimes I wonder if it really happened or if it was just a horrible nightmare from which I never managed to wake up. They were completely out of their minds. They were no longer my sons. They were 5 men dominated by alcohol, by drugs, by the hatred they had cultivated over the years. And I, at 47, mother of 6, who had dedicated my life to raising those boys, found myself transformed into the target of a violence I never thought possible inside my own home, by the hands of those I had carried in my womb. I tried to scream, tried to run away, tried to make them stop, remind them who they were, who I was. But it was like talking to walls, walls that closed around me, suffocating me, destroying me in ways no mother should ever experience. When they finally finished, they left the house laughing, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just committed the worst of crimes. I was left lying on the kitchen floor, among broken dish shards and pieces of my shattered dignity, unable to believe what had happened. I don't know how long I stayed there. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time loses its meaning when your world collapses like that. I only know that at some point, I found the strength to drag myself to the bathroom, to try to wash what had no washing, to hide the marks that no water could erase. Christine arrived before Richard, thank God. When she saw me, she immediately knew something terrible had happened. I didn't need to say anything. She helped me take a bath, change clothes, lie down in bed. She was only 16, but at that moment she assumed the role of mother, taking care of me with a maturity that broke my heart. It was them, wasn't it, Mom? She asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding my hand. I couldn't answer, just let the tears roll. She understood the silence. We need to tell Dad. We need to go to the police. I shook my head negatively, panicking just to think about it. How to tell my husband that his own sons had done that. How to report them to the police. How to transform that private nightmare into a public scandal. I can't, daughter. Your father, he'll kill them. Maybe that's what they deserve, she replied, with a harshness that didn't match her still girlish face. When Richard arrived, hours later, I tried to pretend everything was fine. I said I had fallen, that I had a headache, that I just needed to rest. But he knew me too well, knew how to read between the lines of my silence. What did they do, Betty? He asked, sitting beside me on the bed, his eyes tired from so much work, now alert, concerned. I couldn't answer. How to put that horror into words. How to make my husband, father of those men, understand the monstrosity they had committed. It was Christine who spoke. With a courage I don't know where she got, she told what she had found when she arrived, the state I was in, the obvious conclusions. Richard listened in silence, his face hardening with each word, his hands closing into fists, the veins in his neck jumping from a rage I had never seen in him. I don't believe it, he finally said, his voice low, controlled, but loaded with contained fury. I don't believe that my own sons... No, it can't be true. I understood his denial. It was easier to believe that I had made it all up, that I was confused, that it had been something else, easier than accepting that those who carried his name, his blood, had committed such an atrocity. "Dad," Christine insisted, "look at her. Look at the bruises. Do you really think Mom would make something like this up?" Richard looked at me, really looked, saw the marks I had tried to hide, saw the terror in my eyes, saw the truth that not even I wanted to face, and something inside him broke. I saw it happen, saw the exact moment when the good, hard-working, patient man I had known for almost 30 years transformed into someone else. "I'm going to kill them," he said simply, getting up. "I'm going to kill them, one by one." I grabbed his arm, begging, "No, Richard. It won't solve anything. It will only make everything worse. And what do you suggest? That we pretend nothing happened? That we welcome them with open arms after what they did?" "I'm not that kind of man, Betty. There are things you don't forgive." That night, we didn't sleep. Richard sat in the living room with a machete he used to clear the yard in his hands, waiting. But the boys didn't return. Maybe they knew what they had done. Maybe they were afraid of their father's reaction when he found out. Maybe they were just continuing the party somewhere else. I only know that we didn't see them for days. It was during this interval that Richard made a decision that would forever change the course of our history. A decision that, even after so many years, I still wonder if it was the right one, if there was an alternative, if we could have resolved it another way. But as that old saying goes, when blood becomes poison, there is no antidote that can save you. And our blood, that which ran in the veins of our 5 sons, had transformed into the worst poison of all, one that destroys not only the body, but also the soul, the family, the trust, the love. A poison for which we were not prepared and that almost killed us all. There are times in a mother's life when it seems the world has stopped spinning, when time has frozen in such a terrible moment that you would give anything to go back, to have done differently, to have noticed the signs earlier. But the clock doesn't turn back, and we have to continue carrying wounds that not even time can completely heal. During the 3 days that followed that horrible night, I stayed between the bed and the couch, unable to do the simplest things. My body ached, but my soul bled even more. Christine, my girl of only 16, assumed the role of housewife, taking care of me, making food, trying to maintain some normality in that nightmare scenario. Richard seemed like a volcano about to erupt. He didn't sleep, barely ate, kept walking from one side to the other with that machete in his hand, his eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the sons to return. I had never seen my husband that way in almost 30 years of marriage. He had always been a calm, patient man who resolved everything by talking. But now it was as if he were another person. "Let's report them to the police," Christine insisted, sitting on the edge of the couch where I was lying. "What they did? It's a crime, Mom. It can't be left like this." I shook my head, unable to imagine reporting my own sons. How does a mother do that? How does she look into the eyes of a police officer and say that her own sons, whom she carried in her womb, whom she breastfed, whom she taught to walk and talk, committed such an atrocity? "Your daughter is right," Richard said, stopping his nervous pacing around the living room. "We can't leave it like this, but it won't be the police. I don't trust them. The police here in South Central serve whoever pays more. And our sons, they're involved with people who have dirty money to buy even a police captain. So what are we going to do?" I asked, feeling such great despair that it was as if I were drowning. "I'll solve it my way," was all he said, before leaving the house that morning of the 3rd day. Christine and I were left alone, the tension so heavy inside the house that we could barely breathe. It was the end of September 2000, but the heat seemed like midsummer, stifling, suffocating. Or perhaps it was just the weight of recent events that made the air unbreathable. "Dad's going to do something stupid," Christine murmured, looking out the window, following Richard until he disappeared around the corner of the street. I've never seen him like this. I wanted to say no, that her father was a sensible man, that he would never do something reckless, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I also feared what Richard might do in that state. He returned almost at dinner time with a different countenance. The anger was still there, but now there was something else, a cold, calculated determination that frightened me even more than the fury of the previous days. "Pack your things," he announced as soon as he entered. "Just the essentials. We're leaving here tonight." "Leaving? To where?" I asked, confused. "Far away, to the countryside. I've arranged everything. A friend from the factory has a house in Bakersfield that he doesn't use. We can stay there until we find another place." "But what about the boys?" I asked, still trapped in that maternal instinct that never completely goes away, even after the worst betrayals. The look Richard gave me was so hard that I felt a shiver. "What boys, Betty? I don't have sons anymore. They died to me that night." I felt the tears spring up. As terrible as what they did was, they were still my sons. I still kept inside me the memories of them small, innocent, before the world transformed them into those monsters. "We can't just leave," I argued weakly. "We have a life here. Christine's school, your job." "What life, Betty? Look at what we've become. A destroyed family, living among gangsters, afraid of our own sons. That's not life. And Christine can study anywhere. It's better to start from scratch than to continue in this hell." Deep down, I knew he was right. There was nothing left for us there. Only painful memories, shame, fear. But still, the idea of abandoning everything, of leaving behind the sons who, despite everything, I still loved, it was heartbreaking. "What if they come after us?" I asked, fear tightening my chest. Richard sat beside me, holding my hands with a gentleness that contrasted with the hardness of his gaze. "They won't. I guarantee they won't." There was something in the way he said it that gave me chills. What had Richard done in those hours away from home? What had he planned? I wanted to ask, but at the same time, I didn't want to know. There are truths better left buried. That same night, with just 2 suitcases containing the basics, we left the house where we had lived for more than 20 years. The house where I raised my 6 children, where I laughed and cried, where I dreamed of a better future. We left like fugitives, in the middle of the night, leaving behind not only furniture and clothes, but also pieces of ourselves. A friend of Richard's from the factory was waiting for us in an old car a few blocks down. We got in silently, the silent tears running down my face, Christine's hand squeezing mine, seeking a strength that I didn't have to give. "Everything will be all right," Richard said when the car began to move away from the neighborhood. "We're going to start over, the 3 of us. Like a real family, the 3 of us. A real family." Words that should bring comfort, but that only accentuated the pain of loss. Because as much as I tried to deny it, as much as I knew it was necessary, we were abandoning 5 sons, 5 pieces of my heart that, even after everything, still beat for them. The trip to Bakersfield was silent, each one trapped in their own thoughts, in their own pains. Richard's friend respected our silence, driving focused, only occasionally looking in the rearview mirror as if fearing that someone was following us. We arrived in the early morning. The house was simple, in a rural area away from the city. It had 2 small bedrooms, a living room kitchen, and a bathroom. Nothing compared to our house in South Central, which despite being humble, was spacious, the result of years of expansions to accommodate the growing family. "It's not much, but it's safe," Richard's friend said, handing over the keys. "Nobody will find you here." In the first few days, we lived like zombies, performing the basic tasks of survival without really being present. Christine, always the strongest of us, was the first to react. She found a nearby school, enrolled, started making friends with the neighbors. Richard found work at a mechanics shop in town, thanks to the recommendation of the same friend who helped us escape. I was stuck in that limbo between the horror of the past and the emptiness of the present. I couldn't sleep well, woke up screaming in the middle of the night, was afraid to leave the house. Doctors call it post-traumatic stress. I called it personal hell. Richard tried to help me, in his way. He brought wildflowers that he picked on the way back from work, prepared breakfast on Sundays, massaged my back when the pains were unbearable. But there was an abyss between us that we didn't know how to cross. An abyss made of unshared secrets, of unasked questions, of answers that perhaps we didn't want to hear. "We need to talk about what happened," he said one night, after Christine had already gone to bed. "We can't keep pretending it didn't exist." "I don't know if I can," I answered honestly. how to put that pain into words, how to name the unnameable. Not about that, he clarified, sitting beside me on the small porch of the house. About the aftermath, about what I did. I felt a chill down my spine. For weeks, I had avoided thinking about what Richard might have done in those hours when he left the house before our escape, about what it meant that our sons wouldn't look for. "You don't need to tell me," I whispered, part of me wanting to preserve the image of the good and just man I knew, that I loved. "Yes, I do," he insisted. His voice choked. "I can't carry this alone, Betty. It's too heavy." And then he told me. With details that still haunt me in nightmares, he told how he sought out an acquaintance, a retired police officer who did special services in the neighborhood. How he paid with our savings of years for him and other men to give our sons a scare. Not to kill, Richard made sure to make this clear, but to ensure that they would never bother us again, that they would never discover where we were. They were beaten badly, he admitted, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette, a vice he had abandoned years ago and now resumed. The police officer said they won't walk straight for a good while, and he made it very clear that if they ever try to look for us, the beating will be much worse. I remained silent, absorbing that information. My husband, the man who spent his life working honestly, who taught us values, who was an example to the community, had hired people to beat his own sons. The line between right and wrong had never seemed so thin. "I also spoke with their boss," continued Richard, avoiding my gaze, "the so-called Skull who runs the gang. I explained what happened, showed the photos that Christine took of your bruises when she helped you take a bath. I was shocked. I didn't know about these photos. I hadn't imagined that my daughter had documented that moment of horror. Skull, despite everything they say about him, has a code. Family is sacred. He was disgusted by what the boys did. He said he would take care of them too, in his way, and that we could leave in peace, that no one from the gang would come after us. I tried to process all that. My husband had turned to gangsters and corrupt police to ensure our safety. He had crossed lines we swore we would never cross, and all because of the horror that our own sons had brought into our home. "Do you think I did wrong?" he finally asked, the vulnerability in his voice taking me by surprise. Richard, always so sure, so decided, now seemed like a boy seeking approval. What could I say? That yes, he was wrong to resort to violence? That no, he did what was necessary to protect what was left of our family? The truth is that there was no right answer. Not for a situation so distorted, so outside any normal parameter. "I think you did what you thought you needed to do," I finally answered. "And now, we have to live with it." He nodded, seeming a little relieved to have shared that burden. We stayed there, sitting on the porch under the stars of the Californian countryside, so different from those we could barely see in the pollution of the big city. Two survivors of a shipwreck trying to understand how we reached that unknown beach, how to rebuild something from the wreckage. October arrived with heavy rains, washing away the dust from the ground around the house, bringing renewed green to the trees. I started helping a neighbor who sold cakes and sweets at the town fair. It was good to have something to occupy my mind, to feel that I was still useful, that I still knew how to do something beyond crying for the lost nights. Christine adapted surprisingly well to the new school. Always studious, she soon stood out in classes, made friendships, even started dating a boy from her class. A well-educated, gentle boy, completely different from the young men from the neighborhood. Seeing her smiling again was like a balm for my wounded soul. Richard worked hard at the mechanic's shop, coming home exhausted but satisfied. Working with his hands, fixing engines, was different from the exhausting routine of the cigarette factory. He said he felt more alive, more useful. The worry lines that marked his face began to soften. The gray hair seemed less predominant. But not everything was rosy. The nights were still difficult for me. Nightmares came almost always, distorted images of that night, faces that alternated between the small and innocent boys I raised and the violent men they had become. I would wake up screaming, sweating, sometimes so disoriented that I didn't recognize where I was. "We need to find a doctor for you," Richard insisted after a particularly bad night when I broke a glass trying to drink water with hands trembling uncontrollably. "This isn't normal, Betty. It's been more than a month." "And what will I tell the doctor?" I asked, my voice bitter. "That my own sons—" "No, I can't." It was Christine once again who found a solution. She discovered that there was a psychologist in town, an older lady who charged affordable prices. She made an appointment without telling me, and on the day simply took me, not accepting any refusals. "You don't need to tell everything at once," said Dr. Patricia in the first consultation, a woman of about 60 with kind eyes behind thick-framed glasses. "We can start wherever you feel comfortable." And so it was. Week after week, I dug up that pain, putting it into words for the first time. At first, I only talked about the move, the feeling of uprooting, the constant fear. Then, gradually, I began to tell about the sons, about how we lost them to crime, to drugs, to violence. It took me almost 3 months to be able to talk about the night that made us flee. When I finally told, I cried so much that I thought I would dehydrate. Dr. Patricia just listened, without judgment, without exaggerated shock, just with a silent compassion that was exactly what I needed. "What happened to you is something no mother should go through," she said, when I managed to calm down. "And there is no instruction manual for dealing with this kind of trauma. But I can promise one thing. It will get better. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not even in the coming months. But it will get better." I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted to believe that one day I would wake up without that weight on my chest, without that constant feeling of vigilance, without the fear that had become my constant companion. Christmas 2000 arrived, the first away from the neighborhood, away from our old neighbors, away from the 5 sons who now existed only in the old photos I had the courage to bring. We made a simple dinner: roast chicken, rice, stuffing, the chocolate cake that Christine learned to make. We exchanged modest gifts, bought with the little we managed to save. It was a sad and happy Christmas at the same time. Sad for the absences, for the empty spaces around the table, for the memories of past Christmases when the house overflowed with people, with noise, with life. Happy for the peace we were finally beginning to find, for the chance to start over, for the simple fact of being together and safe. In January 2001, I received news that would again change the course of our history. It didn't come through a letter, phone, or message. It came through the town newspaper in a small note almost hidden in the police pages. "Massacre in South Central Los Angeles leaves 5 dead, all with criminal records, gang retaliation suspected." There were no names, just ages: 27, 25, 23, 21, 19. Exactly the ages of my 5 sons. It could be a coincidence, of course. Massacres were not uncommon in the neighborhoods of Los Angeles at that time, but something inside me, that mother's instinct that never fails, immediately knew. I showed the newspaper to Richard when he returned from work. He read in silence, his face an impenetrable mask. Then he carefully folded the newspaper, placed it on the table, and sat down, suddenly looking old and tired. "Do you think?" I began, unable to finish the sentence. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "And maybe it's better not to know." We didn't talk more about it that night, nor on the following nights. It was as if we had made a silent pact not to seek confirmation, not to dig deeper into that wound. If they were really our sons, there was nothing we could do for them anymore. If they weren't, I preferred not to feed false hopes that they were alive somewhere, perhaps even looking for us with intentions I dare not imagine. That news, paradoxically, brought a strange kind of closure, as if a cycle had completed, allowing another to begin. There was no relief. I could never feel relief at the death of my sons, no matter what they had done. But there was a kind of resignation, of acceptance, that some stories don't have happy endings. Just endings. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice changes in myself. The nightmares, still present, came less frequently. I could leave the house without that constant feeling of being watched, pursued. I even started cooking again, something I always loved and had abandoned since the escape, unable to find pleasure in the simple things of life. Therapy with Dr. Patricia continued, now focused not just on processing the trauma, but on rebuilding a life beyond it. "You are not just a victim, Mrs. Betty," she constantly reminded me. You are a survivor, and survivors move forward one step at a time. One step at a time. That's how I rebuilt my life in that small corner of the Californian countryside. One day after another, one small victory at a time. I learned to smile again, to find pleasure in simple things, to look to the future with something beyond fear. Christine graduated from high school in December 2001 with exemplary grades that secured her a place in a nursing technical course in Fresno. It was the beginning of the realization of her dream, to care for people, to make a difference in the world. Graduation was a moment of immense joy and also of reflection on everything we had gone through to get there. Richard, always the worker, managed to save enough money to buy a small piece of land on the outskirts of Bakersfield. He began to build our house little by little, on weekends, with the help of friends from the shop. He was a man of few words, always was, but in those bricks he raised one by one, he was writing a new chapter in our story. And I found my way gradually. I started selling cakes and sweets I made at home, first just to neighbors, then to small markets in the region. In 2003, with Richard's help and a small loan, I opened a sweet shop in the center of town. Nothing very big, just a counter, a few tables, the smell of cinnamon and chocolate that always brought me comfort. Grandma's Sweets, I called the place, even though I wasn't yet a grandmother. But I liked the sound, the feeling of warmth it conveyed. And inside, while kneading, shaping, baking, I found not just a means of living, but a form of healing. It was there, between batches of cakes and trays of sweets, that I slowly rebuilt the woman I once was. Not the same, I would never be the same again. But a stronger, wiser version, who carried scars, but also the ability to find beauty even after the most devastating storm. Because life, my dears, is just like that. Sometimes it throws us to the ground with such force that we think we will never get up again. Sometimes it presents us with horrors that seem impossible to overcome. But as long as we breathe, as long as the heart continues to beat, there is the possibility of a new beginning. There is the chance to transform even the darkest night into a new dawn. And that's exactly what we did, Richard, Christine, and I. We transformed tragedy into a new beginning, pain into growth, the end of one story into the beginning of another completely different one. A story that, despite everything, was still far from over. Please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and comment on what you think of my story. Leave your opinion. I would love to read it. Do you know what it's like to live looking over your shoulder, feeling that the past might catch up to you at any moment? That's how I lived the first years in Bakersfield. Even after that news in the newspaper about the massacre, something inside me couldn't completely believe that my sons were gone. It was as if a part of my mother's heart refused to accept it, even knowing that it might be better that way. The year 2001 passed slowly, as if time had a different rhythm in the countryside. The seasons were more marked, more felt. Winter with that cutting cold that entered through the gaps of our simple little house, spring exploding in colors in the fields around, summer with its noisy storms that made Christine run to our bed as when she was little. Little by little, we created new routines, new memories. Richard left early for the mechanic's shop, Christine for school. I stayed at home trying to transform those strange walls into a home. I went to consultations with Dr. Patricia twice a week, still unable to talk about certain details of that night, but advancing in small steps out of the dark hole I had fallen into. It was in mid-2001 that I received an unexpected visit. I was alone at home, preparing lunch, when I heard knocks on the door. My heart immediately raced, a reflex of the fear that still dominated me. Who could it be? Very few people knew where we lived. "Who is it?" I asked, without opening. "Mrs. Betty?" "It's me, Mr. Johnson, your neighbor from South Central." I felt my blood freeze. Mr. Johnson, the same one who had warned me about the boy's involvement with the Skull Crew. How had he found us? Why? Could it be a trap? With trembling hands, I opened just a crack in the door, ready to close it quickly if necessary. There he was, the African-American gentleman in his 70s, completely white hair, wearing the same worn cap I remembered seeing every day in the neighborhood. How did you find us?" I asked, keeping the door half closed. Mrs. Betty, I need to talk to you. It's important. May I come in? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door, run, call Richard. But another part wanted to know, needed to know, what had happened after we left. If those 5 bodies in the news were really my sons. I let him in, offered coffee, hospitality that my mother had taught me and that not even fear could completely erase. He accepted, sat at the simple kitchen table, took off his cap, and nervously turned it between his fingers. Mrs. Betty, I won't beat around the bush. I came because I thought you had the right to know the truth. About your boys. The cup trembled in my hand. Were they in the newspaper story? About the massacre? He nodded slowly. They were, all 5, in an abandoned house at the end of the neighborhood where they had set up a kind of hideout. It was an execution, Mrs. Betty. Shot to the head, gang style. I sat down, my legs no longer supporting the weight of my body. Even having suspected, even having felt inside me that it was them, hearing the confirmation was different. It was final. It was real. Who? I began, unable to finish the question. Skull ordered it, Mr. Johnson said simply. After your husband talked to him, showed what they had done to you, he decreed the sentence. In the neighborhood there are these codes, you know. There are things that not even gangsters tolerate. What your sons did crossed all lines. I remained silent, trying to process. My husband indirectly had caused the death of our sons, or maybe it was they themselves, with their choices, who had sealed their own fate. Or maybe it was me, who couldn't see the signs, who didn't know how to protect them from the path they chose. The guilt's mixed, confused, all insufficient to explain the tragedy that had befallen our family. But there's more, continued Mr. Johnson, looking at the coffee that was cooling in front of him. Before the end, your boys confessed something else, about your daughter, Christine. My heart stopped. What? What about Christine? He took a deep breath, clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Betty, they confessed that they had also hurt her. Several times. When neither you nor Richard were at home, the world seemed to collapse around me. No, not this. My girl, my little princess, the only ray of light that was left. They couldn't have done this to her too. It was too monstrous, too painful to absorb. It can't be, I whispered, grabbing the edge of the table with such force that my knuckles turned white. She would have told me. I would have noticed something. Victims don't always tell, Mrs. Betty. Out of shame, out of fear, out of not wanting to hurt those they love. Especially when they're from the same family. Mr. Johnson spoke with a sad wisdom, as if he knew that story from personal experience. I thought you needed to know. So you could help the girl. After Mr. Johnson left, refusing money for the return trip, saying only that he owed this to us, I stayed for hours sitting in that kitchen, his words echoing in my mind. Christine, my little one, carrying such a terrible, such a painful secret, alone, protecting me when it should have been me protecting her. When she arrived from school, I observed her with new eyes, the way she startled at sudden noises, how she avoided certain topics, how she had frequent nightmares that we attributed only to the trauma of having found me that night. Everything made a terrible sense now. Did something happen, Mom? She asked, noticing my fixed gaze. You look so pale. We need to talk, honey, I said softly, indicating the chair across from me. About your brothers. She froze, the color draining from her face. What about them? I received a visit today. From Mr. Johnson. From the neighborhood. I saw the panic in her eyes, her breathing accelerating. And what did he want? To confirm that it was indeed your brothers who died in that massacre, and to tell other things. Things they confessed before dying. Christine dropped the backpack she was still holding. A single tear ran down her young face, and in that tear, I saw the confirmation that my mother's heart didn't want to accept. Oh, honey, I murmured, rising to embrace her. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you carry this alone? She collapsed in my arms then, like a dam that finally breaks after holding too much pressure for too long. Between sobs, she told everything. The threats, the fear, the shame, the guilt for not having done anything to protect me on that last night. I thought it was my fault, she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. That I had done something to provoke it, that if I told you and Dad, you would hate me, or worse, not believe me. Never, my daughter, never would it be your fault. And always, always would we believe you. We stayed like that, embracing, crying, for how long I can't say. Two women broken by the same tragedy, carrying different but equally deep wounds. When Richard arrived and found the scene, he didn't need many explanations. Somehow, he already knew. Or maybe he just suspected, but never had the courage to confront the possibility. We'll find another psychologist for you, I said to Christine that night when she finally managed to calm down. Someone specialized in this type of trauma. She nodded, seeming simultaneously relieved at no longer having to carry the secret and frightened by the prospect of talking about it with a stranger. In the days that followed, Richard was quiet, more closed than normal. He didn't talk about Mr. Johnson's visit, about the confirmation of the son's death, about what they had done to Christine. It was as if he had built a wall around that pain, isolating it somewhere inside himself where it couldn't contaminate him. A week later, he finally spoke, breaking the silence during dinner. We're going to move again. I looked at him, surprised. What do you mean? To where? Farther away. Another state, maybe. California has too many memories, too many ghosts. We need a real fresh start. Part of me wanted to protest. We had just settled. Christine was in school. I was beginning to feel less lost. But another part understood perfectly. Every corner of Bakersfield now seemed haunted by what we had discovered, by Mr. Johnson's revelations, by the shadow of those 5 sons who had transformed into monsters. Where to? I asked simply. I thought of South Carolina. Charleston, maybe. I have a cousin there, works in a metalworking factory, said I can easily get a job. Christine, who until then listened in silence, spoke for the first time. Can I finish the semester here? I'm almost completing some important courses. Richard nodded. Of course, honey. We're not going to run out like last time. We're going to plan. Do things right. That's how, in January 2002, we again loaded our few possessions and set out for another fresh start. This time, there was something different in the air. It wasn't just the desperate escape of the first time. It was a considered decision, a movement toward something, not just away from something. Charleston welcomed us with its mild climate, its tree-lined streets, its organization typical of Southern charm. So different from the Los Angeles neighborhood, so different even from Bakersfield. A new world where no one knew our history, where we could just be an ordinary family trying to rebuild life. Richard got the job at the metalworking factory, as expected. The salary was better than at the mechanic's shop. The benefits included health insurance, something we had never had before. Christine enrolled in the local nursing technical course, determined to follow her dream despite all the traumas, all the difficulties. I, hesitant at first, ended up finding my place again among ovens and sugar. A small confectionery in the center of the city was looking for someone with experience. I didn't have much, just what I learned from my mother and the little I practiced in Bakersfield. But the owner, an elderly Southern lady named Mrs. Williams, liked my manner, my willingness to learn. Making sweets is like making happiness, Mrs. Betty, she would tell me. It doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to be made with love. And so, among frostings and puff pastries, between the aroma of cinnamon and the warmth of the ovens, I was rebuilding not just my professional life, but also my soul. Each sweet that came out perfect was a small victory over the past, proof that I was still capable of creating beauty after so much ugliness. Christine started seeing a psychologist specialized in traumas like hers, Dr. Marina, a young woman but with wise eyes who seemed to have been born for that profession. The first months were difficult. Christine returned from the sessions emotionally exhausted, sometimes unable to talk about what she had discussed. But gradually, like a flower that slowly opens after winter, we saw our girl re-emerge. The sparkle returning to her eyes, the smile becoming more frequent, more genuine. She began to make friends in the course, even agreed to go out with a young man. Something that in the first months in Charleston seemed impossible, such was her fear of getting close to any man. Dr. Marina says I'm making good progress, she commented one night as we were having dinner. She said my resilience is admirable. Richard, who smiled less since he learned what happened to his daughter, reached out across the table and squeezed her hand. You've always been the strongest of all of us, honey, since you were little. It was around this time, mid-2002, that I received a letter. No return address, just my name and the address of the confectionery where I worked. I opened it with my heart racing, fearing bad news, some even worse revelation about the past we were trying to leave behind. But no, it was a letter from Mr. Johnson. Brief, written with the shaky handwriting of someone not used to writing much. Mrs. Betty, I hope this letter finds you and your family well, at peace. I write to inform you that they found those responsible for the death of your boys. It wasn't just Skull who ordered it. The police were involved too, that death squad that operates in the neighborhood. It seems your husband sought them out before talking to Skull. I'm not telling this to bring more pain, but I thought you deserved to know the whole truth. So you can forgive, if possible, or at least understand. May God bless you in your new life, Johnson. I read and reread those words, feeling as if the ground was opening beneath my feet. Richard, my husband, the man I had known for more than 30 years, had gone beyond giving a scare to his sons. He had, directly or indirectly, ordered their deaths. When I returned home that night, he immediately noticed something was wrong. I waited for Christine to go to bed, and then, without accusations, without shouting, I simply placed the letter on the table. I need you to tell me the truth, Richard. All of it. He read in silence, his face aging several years in those few minutes. When he finished, he didn't deny, didn't try to justify himself. He just looked at me with tired, defeated eyes. I was going to tell you one day, when I thought you were ready to hear. You really... I couldn't finish the question. I didn't give the order directly, he said, his voice low, controlled. But when I talked to that police officer, when I showed the photos, I knew what would probably happen, and I did nothing to prevent it. Maybe deep down it was what I wanted. Our sons, Richard, our boys. They stopped being our sons the moment they did what they did to you, to Christine. His voice trembled slightly when mentioning our daughter. They were no longer the boys we raised, Betty. They were something else, something I don't recognize, don't know how to name. I remained silent, the emotions so contradictory within me that I didn't know which to express first. There was anger, yes, but also understanding. There was horror at what he had done, but also, God forgive me, a kind of dark relief at knowing that those men into which my sons had transformed could never hurt anyone again. Do you hate me? He finally asked, looking smaller, more fragile than I had ever seen him. No, I answered honestly. I don't know what I feel, but hate is not one of the things. That night, we slept in separate rooms for the first time since our marriage. Not out of anger or resentment, but because we both needed space to process, to understand what that revelation meant for us, for our marriage, for our future. In the morning, I found Richard sitting on the small porch of our rented house, watching the sunrise. He seemed not to have slept at all, just like me. What do we do now? I asked, sitting beside him. Whatever you want, he replied. If you want me to leave, I'll understand. If you want to report to the police what I did, I'll accept that too. I don't want any of that, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. What happened, happened. We can't change the past, we can only decide how we'll live with it. He looked at me, his eyes shining with contained tears. How can you, Betty? How can you not hate me after what I did? Because I understand why you did it, I replied simply. I don't know if I would have done the same in your place. I don't know if I would have had that courage, for lack of a better word. But I understand. And who am I to judge? We all make mistakes. We all carry guilt. Richard extended his hand, hesitant, almost afraid to touch me. I took it between mine, feeling the calluses from decades of hard work, the prominent veins of someone who is no longer young, the strength that always protected me even when the world was falling apart around us. We'll continue, I said. One day at a time, one pain at a time, and maybe, one day, we'll be able to look back without it hurting so much. He nodded, unable to speak, squeezing my hand as if it were a lifeline in a stormy sea. That's how we continued. Not as a perfect couple, not as a family without scars, but as survivors determined to find some meaning amid chaos, some light after the deepest darkness. Christine, absorbed in her studies and her own healing process, never knew about the letter, never knew about her father's role in her brother's death. It was a burden that Richard and I decided to carry alone, sparing her from yet another layer of pain in a life that had already known too much suffering for someone so young. Months turned into years. Charleston ceased to be just a refuge and became home. The confectionery where I worked prospered, and when Mrs. Williams decided to retire in 2005, she offered me the opportunity to buy the business. With Richard's help, who had been promoted at the metalworking factory, we secured a loan and I fulfilled a dream I didn't even know I had. I became a business owner. Grandma's Sweets. I kept the name I had thought of back in Bakersfield. And this time, it was no longer just a distant dream. In 2006, Christine, already graduated and working as a nurse at the municipal hospital, gave us the news that would transform the name of the confectionery into reality. She was pregnant. "It's a girl," she said, showing the ultrasound one Sunday night. "I'm going to call her Claire, because she came to bring light after so much darkness." Richard, who had allowed himself to smile more in recent years, hugged his daughter with tears in his eyes. "I'm going to be a grandfather," he said, his voice choked. Who would have thought? Claire was born on a spring morning in 2007, filling our lives with a love so pure, so intense, that it sometimes seemed almost painful. Holding her in my arms was like holding the future, the promise that life, despite all its cruelties, still holds moments of indescribable beauty. Seeing Christine as a mother, gentle, protective, strong, was a confirmation that we had succeeded. Despite everything, despite the losses, the pain, the mistakes, we had reached the other side. Not whole, not without scars, but alive, present, capable of loving and being loved. In 2010, when Claire was 3 years old and running through the confectionery enchanting customers with her easy laugh, I received another letter without a return address. This time, it was even briefer. "Mrs. Betty, Mr. Johnson passed away yesterday. He asked to let you know. He said he died in peace, knowing you were all well. May God bless you. A friend." I cried for that man I barely knew, but who had been an important bridge between the past and the present, who had had the courage to bring painful truths when it would have been easier to leave them buried. Because of him, because of his honesty, Christine had received the help she needed. Because of him, Richard and I were able to face the truth about what had happened to our sons. In his honor, I created a new dessert at the confectionery, Johnson's Truffle, made with dark chocolate on the outside and a sweet coconut filling on the inside. Like him, a tough exterior hiding a good heart. Justice, my dears, doesn't always come as we expect. Sometimes it doesn't come through courts, judges, prison cells. Sometimes it comes in the form of small moments of redemption, opportunities for new beginnings, unexpected encounters that change the course of our story. I don't know if what happened to my sons was justice. I don't know if what Richard did, directly or indirectly, can be called justice. I only know that at that crossroads between fear and whatever justice is, we chose the path that allowed us to keep living. Not without pain, not without doubts, but with the certainty that even in the darkest nights, even in the most difficult moments, there exists the possibility of a dawn. And it was with this certainty that we continued our journey one step at a time, building a life that, despite all the tragedies, was still worth living. Because in the end, that's what it means to survive. Not just continuing to breathe, but finding reasons for each breath to be meaningful, each heartbeat to be an affirmation that we choose life, with all its complexities, its pains, and its unexpected beauties. Sometimes I wonder if we're made of the same material as the phoenixes from ancient legends, those magical birds that when they die, turn to ashes, but then are reborn stronger. Because after everything I've been through, I can only believe that there exists within us an inexplicable force, a stubbornness to continue, even when it seems that nothing remains but smoldering ruins of what was once our life. The years in Charleston passed, weaving a new existence for us, quite different from the one we knew in Los Angeles. The milder climate, the more organized streets, the less frantic pace of life, all contributed to healing wounds that we thought would bleed forever. I don't say it was easy, God knows it wasn't, but it was possible, and perhaps that's the most important thing. By 2010, my confectionery Grandma's Sweets had become a known spot in the city. It wasn't much, just a cozy little shop with 5 tables, a glass counter full of goodies, and the permanent smell of vanilla and cinnamon that permeated even my clothes. But it was mine. A place I built from scratch, with my own calloused hands from so much kneading, shaping, baking. Richard continued at the metalworking factory, now as a sector supervisor. Who would have thought that man who barely finished elementary school would come to lead a team of 30 employees? But I always knew my husband had a natural intelligence, a problem-solving ability that no school can teach, and the years had softened his edges, transformed that contained anger into a kind of silent wisdom. Christine, our girl, who was no longer a girl at all at 26, had become a respected nurse at the municipal hospital. She specialized in pediatrics and had a special way with children that made even the most reluctant little ones open up to her. Her marriage to Robert, a pharmacist she met at the hospital, was celebrating 3 years in 2010, and the two were the kind of couple that's a pleasure to see, companions, friends, true partners. And little Claire, our granddaughter, was the sun of our lives. At almost 4 years old, she had her mother's bright eyes and a curiosity that kept everyone on their toes. "Why, Grandma," was the phrase that most often came from that little mouth. "Why is the sky blue? Why can't we eat only sweets? Why does rainwater fall from top to bottom?" And there I went, with all the patience in the world, trying to explain things that sometimes even I didn't know well. "You have more patience with Claire than you had with us," Christine would sometimes joke. "I think grandmas are softer than moms." Maybe it was true. Or maybe life had taught me, in the hardest way possible, to value every second of joy, every opportunity to love, every chance to make a difference in someone's life, especially someone as innocent as Claire, who didn't yet know the cruelties of the world, who saw magic in the simplest things. It was in 2012, when Claire was already in preschool and my confectionery had expanded to a larger space in the center of town, that Richard began to complain of chest pains. At first, we thought it was just fatigue, stress, maybe even a poorly healed cold. But when I found him sitting on the edge of the bed one morning, unable to breathe properly, his pale face covered in cold sweat, I knew it was something more serious. "It's nothing, woman," he tried to reassure me. "It'll pass." But I had already lost too many people in my life to take risks. With Christine's help, who thank God understood these things, we took Richard to the hospital. The tests didn't take long to reveal what I already feared. My husband's heart was compromised. Years of heavy work, constant stress, and who knows, the guilt he carried in silence had taken their toll. "He's going to need surgery," the doctor explained. "The main artery is almost completely blocked. It's a miracle he hasn't had a heart attack yet." Miracle. A strange word to describe our life after everything we'd been through. But perhaps that's exactly what it was, a series of small and large miracles that allowed us to get there, to survive, to rebuild something from the ashes of what we had lost. The days leading up to the surgery were a test of faith. Richard, always so strong, seemed to have aged 10 years suddenly. He would sit on the porch of our house for hours, looking at the horizon as if saying goodbye. One night I found him crying alone in the bedroom, something I had never seen in almost 40 years of marriage. "What is it, old man?" I asked, sitting beside him on the bed. "Are you afraid of the surgery? The doctor said the chances are good." He shook his head, wiping away the tears with the backs of his calloused hands. "It's not that, Betty. It's that, if I die, I wanted to know if you forgive me. For everything." I knew exactly what everything he was referring to. It wasn't just the occasional harshness of our relationship, the normal arguments of any couple. It was that decision made so many years ago, in those terrible days after the night when our sons transformed into monsters. The decision that, directly or indirectly, had sealed their fate. I took his hands in mine, feeling the new fragility in those fingers that had always been so strong. I have nothing to forgive, Richard. You did what you thought you needed to do to protect what was left of our family. You weren't the only one to make difficult decisions back then. We all made choices we'll carry for the rest of our lives. He looked at me with teary eyes, and I saw there the same man I fell in love with at the bakery so many years ago. Not Richard hardened by difficulties, not the father devastated by his son's betrayal, not the man capable of crossing lines we swore never to cross. Just Richard, with his enormous heart, his fierce loyalty, his love that despite all the trials never wavered. I love you, you know, he said, his voice breaking. I always have, even in the worst moments. I love you too, you fool. And everything will be fine with this surgery, because we still have a lot ahead of us. Claire wants us to go to her graduation someday, and I want to see you dancing at her wedding too. He smiled, and in that smile there was a piece I hadn't seen in a long time. The surgery was long, 7 hours that seemed like 7 decades. I stayed at the hospital the whole time, alternating between praying fervently and remembering to breathe. Christine stayed with me, holding my hand in the most difficult moments, forcing me to eat something when my stomach complained. When the doctor finally appeared, his tired face, but with a small smile, I felt my legs weaken with relief. Everything went well, Mrs. Betty. Your husband is a warrior. He'll need care, rest, changes in lifestyle. But we have good reasons to believe he'll have many years ahead. Recovery wasn't easy. Richard, used to working since he was 12, didn't know how to stay still. He complained about the restrictions, the salt-free diet, the medications he had to take at strict times. But gradually, he accepted that he needed to take care of himself if he wanted to see our granddaughter grow up. In 2013, when he was more recovered, we decided it was time to fulfill an old dream. Visit the homeland, Kentucky. Not Millerville, the small town where I was born. I was afraid of the memories that might resurface, of the ghosts of the past that might still wander those dusty streets. But Louisville, Lexington, Frankfort, historic cities I had always wanted to visit and never had the opportunity. It's our delayed honeymoon, joked Richard as we boarded the bus, holding hands like two lovesick teenagers. Those 15 days traveling through the Kentucky hills were a balm for our souls. Away from the routine, away from responsibilities, away even from the painful memories that still occasionally haunted us, I rediscovered the pleasure of simply being alive, of waking each morning next to the man I chose, of tasting different foods, of marveling at the beauty of century-old churches and stone streets that told stories of times we couldn't even imagine. We should have done this before, I commented one night, sitting in the main square of Lexington, drinking hot coffee while watching the movement of tourists. Traveled more, enjoyed more. It's never too late, Richard replied, squeezing my hand. And maybe we needed to go through everything we went through to get here, to value these moments as they deserve. We returned to Charleston renewed, with a different energy. Richard, even retired due to health issues, found a new purpose helping at the confectionery. Who would have thought that those hands accustomed to dealing with metal and heavy machinery would have such skill for decorating cakes and making delicate pastries? But he did. And more than that, he loved the contact with customers, telling stories to the children who entered with wide eyes at the sight of so many sweets. In 2015, when Claire was already 8 years old, we received the news that would complete our family. Christine was pregnant again, this time with a boy. Robert, the father, could hardly contain his happiness. We're going to call him Gabriel, Christine announced during a Sunday lunch, because it's the name of a guardian angel. I felt a tightness in my chest hearing the name. Not because it was the name of an angel, but because it inevitably reminded me of the other sons, those I had lost in such different, such painful ways. Were they angels now? Had they found peace, redemption, forgiveness in whatever exists beyond this life? I like to think so. I needed to believe that to continue. Gabriel was born on a rainy dawn in April 2016, once again filling our hearts with that unrestrained joy that only a baby can bring. Claire, now a proud older sister, seriously assumed the task of protecting and teaching her little brother. "I'll take care of him, Grandma," she told me with the wisdom of her 9 years. Just like you take care of everyone. Those simple words moved me more than she could understand, because for so many years, I felt I had failed as a caretaker, as a mother, as a wife, as a person responsible for keeping a family united, safe, happy. Hearing my granddaughter say that I took care of everyone was like receiving an absolution I didn't know I needed. In 2018, when Gabriel was already 2 years old and was a little hurricane of energy, and Claire at 11 was becoming a preteen full of ideas and dreams, Richard and I celebrated 45 years of marriage. We didn't want a big party, but Christine insisted on at least having a special dinner. 45 years isn't for everyone, she argued. You deserve to celebrate. After everything. After everything. 3 words that carried the weight of a story our daughter knew only in part. She knew about the financial difficulties, knew about the escape from the neighborhood, knew that her brothers had followed a wrong path and ended up dead, but she never knew the darkest details, the most difficult decisions, the complete price we paid for that new chance, and perhaps it was better that way. Perhaps certain burdens should indeed be carried only by those who were there when the choices were made, when the paths divided irremediably, when fate showed its cruelest face. The celebration was intimate. Just us, Christine, Robert, and the children, at a cozy restaurant by the river that runs through Charleston. Richard, always so reserved, surprised everyone by making an emotional toast. "To my Betty," he said, raising his glass of wine. Just one, allowed by the doctor for the special occasion, the strongest woman I've ever known, who taught me that true love isn't made only of beautiful moments, but mainly of staying together in the impossible moments. I love you, old woman. Thank you for these 45 years. I couldn't respond, emotion forming a knot in my throat. I just squeezed his hand on the table, our intertwined fingers telling a story that words could never fully express. In the following years, our life entered a tranquil rhythm, almost as if the universe had finally decided we had gone through enough trials. The confectionery prospered, now mainly managed by a young couple I hired, allowing me to work just a few hours a day, more for pleasure than necessity. Richard, with his health stabilized thanks to constant care, dedicated himself to the small garden he cultivated in the backyard of our house, and to woodworking classes he began attending at a community center. Christine continued to grow professionally, now as head nurse of pediatrics, respected by colleagues and adored by little patients. Robert opened his own pharmacy, an old dream he managed to achieve after years of disciplined saving. Claire and Gabriel grew up healthy, intelligent, surrounded by a love we made sure to demonstrate every day in every possible way. In 2020, when the pandemic arrived bringing fear and uncertainty to the whole world, our family faced yet another test with the resilience we had learned to cultivate over the years. We temporarily closed the confectionery, adapted the house to receive the children who couldn't go to school, supported Christine who worked on the front lines at the hospital, exhausted but determined. It was a difficult time, which brought to the surface old fears I thought were overcome. The fear of losing loved ones, the fear of the unknown, the fear of an uncertain future. But it was also a time of reflection, reconnection, rediscovery of the strength that exists in simplicity, in affection, in small shared moments. And here I am in 2025, at 72 years old, sitting on the porch of my house in Charleston, looking at the garden that Richard cultivates with such care, smelling the cornbread baking in the oven, hearing in the distance the laughter of Claire, now an 18-year-old teenager about to enter college, and Gabriel, a smart 9-year-old boy obsessed with dinosaurs and adventure stories. Life, my dears who are watching me, is not a straight path. It's a road full of unexpected curves, deep holes, crossroads that require impossible decisions. Sometimes we get lost on this road. Sometimes the weight of the baggage we carry seems too heavy to bear. Sometimes the storm is so strong that we can't see even one step ahead. But if there's one thing I've learned in these 72 years of existence, it's that there is always, always the possibility of starting over, of transforming pain into strength, scars into wisdom, endings into new beginnings, of finding, even in the darkest moments, a reason to continue, a purpose, a light however small it may be. My story isn't pretty, isn't perfect, isn't the kind of fairy tale we'd like to tell our grandchildren before bed. It's a real story, with parts that still hurt to remember, with choices that still weigh on the conscience, with losses that will never be completely overcome. But it's also a story of love that survived the unthinkable, of courage to face the impossible, of faith when everything indicated there was no more hope. It's the story of a broken family that found a way to rebuild itself, not with the same pieces, not in the same way, but in a new, different way, perhaps even stronger because of the cracks. So, if you're watching this and going through some difficult time, if you feel that your life has collapsed and there's no way to put the pieces back together, if you believe that some wounds are too deep to heal, I want you to know, there is life after tragedy. There is joy after the most excruciating pain. There is love waiting to be found, to be given, to be received, even when everything seems lost. I'm not saying it's easy. God knows it's not. I'm saying it's possible. And sometimes, knowing it's possible is all we need to take the next step, and then the next, and the next, until we realize we're walking again, that we're alive, that we still have a story to tell. Before ending this video, I wanted to thank all of you who followed my account up to here. If my story touched your heart in some way, if it brought some comfort or hope to your life, I ask that you leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that new beginnings are possible. And please tell me in the comments where you're watching from, which city, state, or even country. This grandma here is very happy to know that her voice is reaching hearts in places she may never have the opportunity to visit personally. A tight hug from this lady who learned in the hardest way that rebuilding life from the ashes is not only possible, sometimes it's the only option we have, and that in this reconstruction we can discover a version of ourselves we didn't even know existed, stronger, wiser, more capable of truly loving despite everything, despite the pain, despite the scars we carry forever. Until the next video, my dears, may God bless you and your families. Grandma Betty signs off with a heart full of gratitude for having shared a little bit of my story with you.